We are gathered here today to embark on an exploration of the intricacies of human relationships. I must respectfully decline to engage in the use of the colloquialism coffee lingo. Instead, I request that you provide me with the 2 largest cups of regular coffee that you serve. I made this request of the young barista at the cafe adjacent to my residence. The individual in question appeared to be approximately 20 years of age. In fact, it seems that the majority of individuals in this locale are approximately 20 years of age. I was astonished at my own memory of events, recalling my own age with clarity. The barista did not take long to pour 2 cups of coffee after I paid cash. However, he then proceeded to count the change, which caused him visible discomfort. I could see that the barista was annoyed with me for not paying with a credit card like everyone else. I was not concerned with his annoyance. I was simply old-fashioned. I am, it must be acknowledged, somewhat stubborn and not inclined to change my ways. I carried the 2 cups of coffee, along with my 57-year-old. After a brief period of waiting, the woman arrived at the rear of the coffee shop. She scanned the area for my table and proceeded to take a seat. I was immediately struck by her striking appearance, which seemed to defy her age. Despite being the same age, she appeared approximately 10 years younger. It was evident that she had been engaged in rigorous physical exercise and, in the interim period, had lost approximately 5 kilograms. Her hairstyle, as always, had been meticulously styled by her personal hairdresser and continued to exude a certain charm, particularly when set against her magnificent golden-hued light hair. I did not feel the need to show the requisite politeness and rise from the table when she approached. I was fortunate to have finally agreed to meet with her 5 years after our divorce. One might inquire as to why I did not select a more conventional establishment where the preparation of coffee is a more established practice. Instead of an enthusiastic greeting, I inquired, "God, Tracy, these individuals are incapable of brewing a satisfactory cup of coffee, even if Ju Valdez himself were present." Demonstrating the proper methodology, Ju Valdez represents the Colombian coffee and all local farmers. She exhibited a nervous smile as she sat on the opposite stool. "I don't wish to argue, Ben," she began, selecting her words with care. "I simply desire some form of resolution. You are not obliged to contribute. I recognize that I made significant mistakes. At the time, I was not fully aware of the extent of my actions, but in hindsight, I understand the gravity of my errors. I took your kindness for granted and misinterpreted it as weakness. I allowed my selfish tendencies to take over, and I turned to the bus as an outlet for my frustrations. I was, to put it frankly, a self-centered individual. In the evenings, I find myself alone in my apartment, watching something on TV. I am unable to identify the specific program. The film depicts my isolation and loneliness. I yearn for our conversations, the mere sound of your voice, regardless of the topic. I miss the trivialities of life, the fleeting moments, and the casual smiles. I had always assumed that we would be together forever, despite my misdeeds. Despite my actions, I still believed that we would be together for many years to come. I did not interrupt her, allowing her to express what had apparently been building up inside her and needed to be released. I simply listened. I never for a moment thought that I would get caught. I fell for the trap of an experienced seducer. She hesitated, then hurried till she attempted to correct herself, stating that while he was a skilled seducer, it was not as though she had succumbed to his charm. She faltered, suggesting that she had willingly followed him because she was foolish and selfish. Tracy spoke intently, studying her coffee cup throughout her monologue, never once lifting her eyes to meet mine. As she paused in her monologue and brought the cup to her lips, I silently observed her. How many times in our 27 years of marriage had I kissed those still beautifully outlined lips? I abruptly realized that she was now looking at me as if expecting a response. "This meeting and the subsequent narrative was at your behest. I have requested a meeting with you on numerous occasions since you initiated divorce proceedings. Why did you consent to this meeting now?" she inquired, returning her cup to the table. "It took considerable time for me to reach a point where I felt able to engage in discourse with you." In a fit of rage, I replied, "I loved you with all my soul, and perhaps I still do to a limited extent. You have betrayed my love for what I perceive to be a trivial pursuit of physical intimacy. In addition to this, you have also betrayed my trust. I am left to wonder, what did I do to deserve all of this?" I asked her a question that had long been a source of distress for me. "Nothing," she replied. "It is not your fault. It happened because of me. I bear responsibility for what occurred. I wish I could pretend that by this moment, I had moved on from this significant part of my life and did not crave answers. I wish I could act like I had left it all behind, but that would be far from the truth. One might posit that the antithesis of love is not hatred, but indifference. I had not yet overcome my hatred, but I was on the path to indifference. I demanded an account of how it happened and, most importantly, an explanation of why it happened. I continued our long overdue conversation in a steady voice, pushing aside my barely sipped the rationale behind her actions was straightforward. She began with a sigh, stating that she had recently turned 50 and felt somewhat out of place and unwanted. She elaborated that this sentiment had gradually taken hold in recent years, noting that men's gazes had become less frequent in her direction. She then hastily added that she was aware of this change. She had always told and shown me that I was the most beautiful to her. However, there are times when women desire appreciation from others. I believe Edward saw that I needed him. After a brief pause, she continued, "We had been colleagues for many years and occasionally spoke, but suddenly he became my best friend. We began talking almost daily, and our conversations gradually became more profound and personal. Edward was a handsome man, and several unmarried women from the office had dated him, giving him high marks. I knew he was a player, but I thought I was in control of the situation. Clearly, I was mistaken. I inquired, feeling a sudden, intense, and cold knot form in my stomach. She replied that they had met for lunch on several occasions, as well as 1 or 2 dinners when I informed him I was working late. Additionally, they had frequently met for coffee. I was aware of the nature of his intentions. Despite my initial misgivings, I acquiesced to the situation. How long did this arrangement persist, Tracy? I suddenly felt a sudden dryness in my throat, as if I had swallowed a large quantity of saliva. She replied that it had lasted approximately a year. Nothing. How could it hurt you? I never deprived you of anything, and I never engaged in any activity with him that I would not have done with you. Tracy sighed once more and removed a napkin from the holder, clenching it in her fingers. I am aware that this may sound cliché, Ben, but it truly was just sex. We did have fun, but there was no discussion of love, and you are suggesting that your sexual gratification outweighed the commitment you had made to me in marriage. I find that assessment to be rather idealistic. Everything was going well between us, and you would have remained unaware of the situation had it not been for the intervention of an unwelcome third party. Despite being married and experiencing a general sense of contentment, I found myself questioning whether it would have been preferable to revert to a period when our relationship was more harmonious. I only became aware of this incident due to a report from my retired neighbor, Ralph Gordon. He informed me that my wife and an unidentified male had gained access to my residence during the day without authorization. It was peculiar to receive that information. I promptly got into my vehicle and, 20 minutes later, discovered Tracy and Edward engaged in sexual intercourse in my marital bed. I interrupted their sexual encounter by striking the back of his head with the back of my fist, causing their heads to collide. Both individuals sustained injuries. Due to the fact that both individuals had sustained concussions, I proceeded to loom over the cowering couple for an additional 5 minutes before finally kicking the lover and slamming the door shut. This marked the definitive end of our relationship. Upon learning of the affair, I expressed my feelings in a rather simplistic manner. I recognized that my actions were misguided and that I cannot undo the damage that has been done. An error on my part. I recognize that you, too, have made missteps in your life. Did you truly believe that you had to take such an extreme measure? We could have addressed this together. Tracy said in a pleading voice, I have been married for 27 years. What made you think I would give you my blessing for a year? While I acknowledge the existence of a long-term extramarital relationship, I believe that the passage of 5 years is a sufficient period of time for one to move on from such a situation. I am currently single, as is Tracy, and our children are understandably upset with both of us. I therefore propose that we attempt to reconcile, given that we had 27 years of a fulfilling marriage together. Tracy continued to persuade me, and I began to wonder what she was hoping to achieve. I corrected her, pointing out that we had in fact had 26 years together. I cannot say that the last year was a particularly good one for me, and I am aware that it was not a positive experience for you either. Regardless of whether I discovered your infidelity or not, your actions constituted a betrayal. I would like to add that I am aware of what happened to your lover after I left. Tracy, taking another sip of coffee, saw that I was watching her intently. Despite this, she flinched for a moment. A few months later, he left for another woman. She was younger and prettier. I informed you of this. Was it merely sexual, or was there an underlying emotional connection? She inquired, her tone evincing a certain reluctance. It was just a casual sexual encounter with someone else's spouse, I replied. She appeared visibly discomfort, averting her gaze and gazing at the ceiling fan. Do I deserve such a lack of respect from you? I asked. No, you don't, she replied, her voice low and barely audible. I rose from my seat and poured each of us a second cup of over-roasted, bitter coffee. The flavor was so unpleasant that it seemed to perfectly capture the essence of our conversation. The beverage appeared to be an ideal complement to our discussion. Despite the cordiality that Tracy and I exhibited in our brief encounters at family gatherings, I consistently avoided prolonged one-on-one interactions with her. She persistently attempted to initiate conversation, yet I adeptly averted any potentially compromising circumstances, both for her and for myself. I remained uncertain as to whether I would resort to physical violence against her in private or succumb to emotional distress. I was often overcome with emotion, seeking an outlet for my feelings. Interestingly, the only place I did not miss Tracy was the bedroom. Given that I had never once looked at other women with desire during the 27 years of my marriage, I was uncertain about the modern nightly habits of the American man over 50. I conducted a realistic assessment of my attributes and concluded that the potential choice in the female dating pool for someone like me would be quite limited. I am an average height, average income male who cannot claim that his equipment is as impressive as a donkey. I was astonished and somewhat shocked when single women began to appear around me. Many of them were not at all shy about expressing their intentions. I was previously unaware that there were significantly more single women over 50 than single men. Additionally, it seems that many single men over 50 prefer younger partners. The aforementioned factors contribute to a reduction in the number of available male partners of the same age for single women over 50. When coupled with the factors of decency and sociability, the likelihood of success for men over 50 who are not afraid to meet and interact with unfamiliar women increases significantly. This was never a problem for me, so in the last 5 years, I have had as much diverse female company as I desired. It is likely that many women would have assumed that I also had a choice regarding the type of contacts I wanted with the ladies, whether short-term or long-term. It is evident that not every woman was seeking a long-term marital partner. Some of my new female acquaintances, as well as some men, were merely interested in introducing variety into their lives. In contrast, I dated both types. I was not necessarily on a mission to find the next Mrs. Ben Arniston, but I would have been open to the possibility of meeting a suitable candidate. The only absolute exclusion was the return of Tracy Arniston into my life. Why are you alone, Tracy? I inquired, somewhat surprised. You still look great, so finding a man shouldn't be a problem for you. Furthermore, you aren't shy about meeting men. She gasped, and for the first time, I felt ashamed for having insulted her. Actually, that's not what I meant, and you know it. I corrected myself. Tracy snorted in offense, but then she had a change of heart. To concede that I was correct, perhaps I am not inclined to meet another man. Perhaps I have come to recognize that I have already encountered the appropriate individual. Despite having lost him, I now desire to reclaim him. She stated, I am aware that I treated you in an unacceptable manner. However, I also recognize your inherent goodness and your belief in forgiveness. I am aware of your belief in forgiveness because I am more intimately acquainted with you than anyone else. It required all of myself. I restrained myself from raising my voice in the cafe. You are not a foolish woman, Tracy. Did you ever consider the potential consequences of being discovered? I growled through clenched teeth. No, I never anticipated being caught. She responded. We should not have brought it into our home. I concede that was an error in judgment, but it was the only instance in which we did so. Edward had been pressuring me for weeks to engage in sexual intercourse in our bed or in yours. I was aware of his intentions. However, I eventually yielded to his persuasions. In retrospect, I believe that was a mistake. Ralph's actions, as a friend, in informing you of my identity were beneficial. Many individuals would likely refrain from such involvement. Tracy paused, awaiting my response, but received none. She then resumed her confession, in the clear light of day. I'm sorry is inadequate to convey my feelings. I was foolish and overconfident in numerous ways. Despite this, Ben, I request your return. I require your presence. I will even resort to begging if necessary. Her voice was on the verge of breaking, and her words carried. notes of desperation with just a hint of sympathy for her evident brokenness. I shook my head negatively as Tracy carefully studied my face to gauge my response. There was no triumph or satisfaction in my words. There was no revenge. I was simply stating what was obvious to me. Please, Tracy, do not put us both in an awkward position. How about putting my feelings above your own for once, just like you should have done 5 years ago? Actions have consequences. Unfortunately, you forgot about that, I said firmly. Tracy sniffled. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. You are correct, she said, the flicker of hidden hope in her eyes extinguishing. I will not bother you anymore. There was a time when that forlorn look would have compelled me to stand up and embrace her. I felt a sharp pain for both of us as I watched her, not waiting for my reaction, stand up and, with her head down, leave the cafe. I watched Tracy's retreating figure, then continued to gaze at the door long after it had closed. A woman in her mid to late 50s approached my table and placed a cup of salted caramel latte in front of me. She informed me that she knew I disliked our coffee and wanted me to leave on a positive note. She inquired if I had told her, and I confirmed that I had not. She then asked if I wanted to completely shatter her soul. I replied that there was a time when I had desired to destroy her, but someone had convinced me that I was better than that. I acknowledged that I still had some negative feelings towards her, but I had come to realize that she was not as bad as I had once thought. I replied, smiling involuntarily, that I had doubts as to whether that was really true. The woman sat on my knees, hugged me around the neck with one arm, and kissed me tenderly. I glanced at the wedding ring shimmering on her left hand. In 2 months, Sandy Caruso and I would get married. I had no doubts. Unlike the previous Mrs. Ben Armington, this good person would always be my top priority. It is akin to losing one's closest person. I had observed the deterioration of one such individual due to cancer at a medical facility a decade prior. Consequently, I am committed to prioritizing my partner. She bestowed upon me another kiss, characterized by infinite love. I became aware of several cafe employees who were entering the premises, their demeanor indicating joy at witnessing our kiss. They had never interacted with me previously, as I had not consumed coffee at this establishment, despite my affection for the proprietor. I considered the concept of karma until I encountered Sandy on a bicycle ride approximately 2 years ago. I had not ridden a bicycle since childhood, but following my divorce, I found myself with a significant amount of leisure time to maintain my physical fitness. I regularly attended the gym, but I was not particularly enthusiastic about the cardiovascular exercises there when I was still married to Tracy. I once proposed purchasing bicycles and riding together, but she was not interested. Once I was single, I found the idea of riding a bicycle with another person to be a novel and invigorating change in my post. In the context of marriage, I made the decision to purchase a high-quality road bike and embark on regular rides. While I primarily rode solo, I occasionally joined organized group rides with other health enthusiasts. However, I faced challenges in locating John Henry Trail markers, distance markers for hiking and bike touring in the mountainous regions of central Idaho. On one such ride, I inadvertently deviated from the trail while attempting to determine the optimal direction for continued travel. At that moment, a woman approached me and, upon recognizing me as a member of the ride, inquired about my intentions. When I confirmed my participation, she expressed her approval with a melodious greeting. The fit stranger, who I had initially perceived as a mere acquaintance, then informed me that I had missed a right turn approximately half a mile back. I duly followed her advice and, upon turning my bike around, discovered that she was positioned directly in front of me, exhibiting a level of enthusiasm that I found somewhat overwhelming. As she stood up in the saddle and began vigorously pedaling, I observed her backside, which was tightly wrapped in spandex cycling shorts and, I must admit, rather attractive. However, this observation was soon interrupted by the stranger, who demanded that I cease staring at her buttocks and instead engage in a more mature conversation while we continued riding. For the subsequent 36 miles, we continued our journey side by side at a leisurely pace, exchanging narratives from our respective lives. I recounted the tale of my unfaithful spouse, while she shared the story of her late husband, who succumbed to cancer. We also discussed our adult children, each of us having 2, and our grandchildren, with Sandy having 3 and I having only 1. The total distance covered that day was 52 miles, the furthest I had previously ridden being 35 miles. However, with the company of such an engaging and fascinating companion, the miles seemed to pass by unnoticed. The following evening, we had a despite the fact that my leg muscles were experiencing significant discomfort and I was moving with some difficulty. Within 2 weeks, our relationship became exclusive. On our fourth date, we shared a beer. Days as an aging single playboy were over. Ahead of me lay a life full of new experiences and the love of a wonderful lady who made my heart beat again. As we conclude our journey into the world of human relationships, please remember to subscribe, like, and share our content. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.